Hello and welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video. This is a frontline update for the 24th of January 2023. I have previously done my news part of this frontline update and released that earlier. The whole video was too long, so this is just the frontline part. Okay, so frontlines. Northeast, we go to Kupiansk to Svatove to Kreminna. Interestingly, as far as rebar, the pro-Russian source says, very little. The Starobel's direction, there's no significant changes in this section. In fact, the artillery duels, but they have nothing from here to Solidar, so here to Bakhmut. They do say that in Zhytomyr, Chernihiv, Sumy, and Kharkiv regions, so four separate regions, the mobilization and recruitment of new AFU formations continues. They were talking yesterday about how actually they are starting entire formations, like 1,500 troops with all this mechanized stuff that's coming in. They're creating entirely new sort of battalions or whatever. And here they say the enemy currently has no problems with replenishing the number of troops. I don't know whether that's just a little dig about them losing lots of troops, but it's also admitting that they are getting significant numbers to reinforce. Some people forget that actually, at the beginning of the war, they had 900,000 reservists, the Ukrainians, because the Donbass has allowed them to cycle through a load of reservists through since 2014 and give them combat experience. The Ukrainians do have a lot of people to draw on. Yes, the Russians have more, but they're going to be drawing on a lot of people now who are just mobilized. Ukrainians have a lot of combat experience to draw on. So there is that. Anyway, Defmon says the AFU in the Svatove area repulsed attacks around Novoselivska and Stelimakivka. There's not a lot of information coming from here at the moment. I've not moved anything in a few days. The Russians have gotten reinforced, so it will take a few days to pick them off. That's his way of describing things. This is true. Russians were reinforcing Kuzmivka because they were on the back foot. Novoselivska did get taken and is under the control of the Ukrainians. So just to go to my map, here is the Kupiansk area, here is Svatove, and we have Kuzmivka just north west of there, and Novoselivska is this town on the heights. So this is important to understand. This is on high ground, much more difficult for the Russians to take control of. They have flattened it with artillery, but the Ukrainians are going to be at an advantage. However, the Russians have reinforced their troops around that area. Null report says the airfield have repelled attacks near Sinkivka and Yahidne, which is just sort of north of where I'm talking about there, since a couple of days. More Russian activity has been noted and more manpower. So it does seem to be that the Russians are reinforcing the area. Near Kuzmivka, the situation is unchanged. So let's go back to my map and we can see just looking for Yahidne. Here it is. So attacks around there, or the Ukrainians have repelled Russian attacks there. And Sinkivka is actually all the way up near Liman Pershi. So attacks around there repelled Russian attacks there. So other than that, really not a lot to report until we get further down to sort of Ploshchanka, Chervonopipivka and Kreminna all the way down here. The ISW says that, yes, Stelimakivka, Novoselivska. Geolocated combat footage posted on January 22nd shows Russian forces conducting a human wave-style assault on Ukrainian positions near Novoselivska. This is interesting and nothing that we particularly heard. This is the sort of approach that Wagner have in Bakhmut, which is using humans and just throwing them at the problem. They don't have the mechanized equipment down there, it seems, and artillery apparently has not been in the support of those troops. Russian mill bloggers have claimed that heavy fighting is ongoing in Novoselivska, where Ukrainian forces are trying to advance eastward. But that claim of human waves and geolocated footage to show that is an interesting indication of something. I wonder whether it is a lack of mechanized equipment up there. Maybe the terrain is difficult for mechanized equipment to be used. Who knows? Then we come down towards Kreminna, and there are repelled attacks towards Tierney and Serebryankia Forest. So let's have a look at that on the map. And just to let you know that the LNR ambassador to Russia has claimed that Russian forces near Kreminna hold positions within 50 to 200 meters of Ukrainian forces. And geolocated footage posted on January 21st shows that Russian forces hold positions southwest of Ploshchanka in the Zaravka Gully. Okay, so as we look at Ploshchanka, there's a gully here that sort of comes down there, and then there are heights in between two gullies actually, and I think that's where the Russian forces are sitting at the moment. Let's have a look at that on a topographical map. Here it is. Here's Svatove up there, Krasnoyarchensky and Kreminna down here. And you can see that this is all on low grounds. And then as we get in towards Ploschanka, um, so then we've got Chervonopopivka there. We have these two gullies. Sorry, and I think actually that might well be Ploschanka. Let's have a look at the, yes. So that's the Cyrillic writing there. So that's Ploschanka, and there's a gully coming down here that connects it to Chervonopopivka, and then there's this other gully here, and I think they hold this high ground just to the south of Ploschanka, and that is what is allowing them to retain that position. It's a good position to take, and it appears that the Ukrainians have struggled to regain that because they took that maybe 2 weeks ago now, and although Ukraine appear to be doing quite well to the south of Kreminna, fighting is very close, intense fighting in the forests. They appear to have been on the back foot a little bit further to the north. Different maps show different things. So Russian maps show a big advantage for the Russians here as they push towards Tierney. Some Ukrainian mappers have this much more of a grey zone, and the Ukrainians much closer. I'll just show you that. So NOAA report says south of Kreminna progress is steady, but the forest is dense and fighting occurs each 50 to 100 meters. Russian forces conduct a lot of counterattacks west of Livka, which is north of Kreminna. It makes advancing complicated, so they're struggling a little bit more to the north. Ukrainians repelled an attack on Chervonopopivka, but doesn't control it. So here's what I'm saying. So, you've got tyranny in places over there, but NOAA report says a grey zone, Russians much closer control to Kreminna, and Ukrainians controlling a lot more, possibly now grey zone around Chervonopopivka and Dubrova. So that looks quite different to this huge it's more that the Russians control this, just a little bit there, grey zone, and the Ukrainians are in and around here. So it's slightly different map as I would interpret it. And then coming down to Kreminna, here's a bit of footage that came out yesterday. This is of the 76th Guards Air Assault Division defending against Ukrainian troops. Sounds like there's a bit of an autocannon going here. Let's just show you what it is fighting is like in the forest. I mean, that sounds like an autocannon on something like a BMP, but I'm not sure whether it is. It might just be a heavy machine gun. I'm sure someone will let me know. But because getting mechanized vehicles in that forest is going to be difficult. But either way, there's heavy fighting going on in the forest, as according to pretty much everyone. So there you go. That is what the pro-Ukrainian sources have to say of the area, and then we're going to move on towards Bakhmut. I'm just trying to see if I don't think Defmon says anything particular about Kreminna, so we'll move on to the Bakhmut area. So as we come down further down south past Belorivka, no news from there, no news around Spirny. The Russians are attacking, as you can imagine, pretty much everywhere around here. Repelled attacks around Vesely, Rozdalivka, Krasnopolivka, although I say around there, the Russians apparently do have control over Krasnopolivka or Krasnopolia, depending on how you say it. And then we come down to the Soledar area, where just some interesting footage of Soledar to give you an idea of what it now looks like. That is that's the effect of war on a once bustling community. That is Soledar. Anyway, that gives you an idea of what they end up fighting over, or how it looked after they fought in and around it. Pretty sad. So we come down Blahadatny, Krasnohora, all these places still seeing a lot of activity. Defmon saying not sure exactly what's going on with Krasnohora and how much advance it has or hasn't been there for the Russians. Let's have a look at some of the sources. So Noel report says in Krasnohora, Russian forces have been halted. Fighting goes on east of Blahadatny, north of Yakovlivka. Russian forces are now actively attacking towards Vasily, so that's up in the northern area. Russian pressure on all sides, but the situation is unchanged. And Defmon here says, just to add to that, uh, um, the status of Krasnohora is unsure, but attacks in the direction of Paraskevivka is nothing new. So that is here, Krasnohora, Paraskevivka just there, attacking towards there. And all these attacks towards Vasily, a bit north of Vasily as well. And indeed through Horivka, he says. So, yeah, activity all around. Not too much change, although I have changed my map slightly because I think the Russians probably have gained around Pidorodny, so to the west of Pidorodny, going towards Yahidny here. This Yahidny, goodness me, so many same name places. And then we come down to Bakhmut, around this meatpacking plant that's just here. I think there's been gains just north there, just up to Pidorodny. And then there is sort of fighting, quite intense fighting around this area, this sort of northeastern area of um, Bakhmut. So Rebar's summary of all of that is in the Soledar set to the Wagner PMC assault detachments. After liberating the village of Krasnopilia, are advancing towards Razdolivka, north of Soledar, and towards Blahadatny to the west. Units of the 10th Mountain Assault Brigade, reinforced with 2 units of armored vehicles, made an unsuccessful attempt, so those are Ukrainians, to storm Russian positions in the Razdolivka line. The offensive was thwarted by artillery fire, as according to him. I don't understand this. Members of the AFU 17th Tank Brigade reported that Soledar was lost due to commanders misplacing the 128th Mountain Assault Brigade. I don't know how you can misplace an entire brigade of troops. Maybe they mean to put them in the wrong place. And it was a mistake defensively. According to the AFU task force, in the past 2 weeks, the Ukrainian garrison in the Soledar area had more than 2,000 dead and wounded. So that's the pro-Russian source. Northeast of Bakhmut, Russian troops are fighting in the vicinity of Krasnohora, where the Ukrainians are trying to hold a defensive line. And Ukrainian artillery is firing at the Russian armed forces in those areas. Um, they have said as well. Here we come. So Ukrainian formations in the Krasnohora area are supplied with artillery guns and rockets, including the locally produced Olka M MLRS with a range of up to 130 kilometers. Those are unguided, as well as a large number of armored vehicles. The Ukrainians are currently facing a significant ammunition shortage, making mass shelling impossible. One unit cannot use more than 5 shells per day. A makeshift depot was organized in Paraskevivka, where shells, thermal images, UHF radios, and batteries were delivered the day before. That's interesting if true. Don't know how true that is. Sometimes you'll find that Rebar projects, so they'll say that when the Ukrainians make an accusation against the Russians, they'll say a day later that actually the Ukrainians are suffering that thing. Who is right? I don't know. There's propaganda going on both sides, but that is quite a common common sort of technique that we see. Okay, as we come down to the center of Bakhmut, let's remind ourselves of the topography. So this is Solidar, all in lower ground. The Ukrainians have basically retreated broadly to behind this river, and on the banks as it starts to rise here. Russians are fighting over this. Maybe Krasnohora, they're still fighting in there. You've got the railway line as it goes up there. And then as we come into Bakhmut, the Russians are now in control of all of this higher ground to the east of Bakhmut, and there is this piece of higher ground just to the southwest, and then you have Klishchivka. So the Ukrainians are still holding just about, it seems, behind Klishchivka on the western outskirts, in the entrenchments they built there. But along the canal here and going up to this higher ground, it looks like the Russians have advantage here and are now seeking control of this area between Ivanivska and Klishchivka and trying to make inroads there in order to cut off supply routes that come in. So that's the topography of the area. This is what it looks like here. So as we zoom out, you've got Opitny. There's now geolocated confirmation that the Russians are in the southern sort of outskirts of Bakhmut and Opitny, as according to the ISW. Ukrainian State Border Guards Service reiterated that Ukrainian forces control the majority of Bakhmut itself. And are conducting successful counterattacks to regain lost positions in the area, although that's a bit vague. A Russian mill blogger claimed that Wagner Group forces are advancing in urban areas on the eastern and southern outskirts of Bakhmut. Geolocated combat footage posted on January 22nd confirms the Russian troops have occupied the northern part of Opitny and southern outskirts of Bakhmut. And then really, that's sort of all of that is pretty much confirmed by all the different sort of sources. The Rebar does say the withdrawal of the 60th Mechanized Brigade of the Ukrainians from Druzhkovka Station continues due to losses sustained. Their strongholds and positions are manned by members of the 93rd Brigade, which arrived to replace them. So these are often the sort of claims. Although when you do get rotated units, the question is: are they being rotated just to keep them fresh, or are they being rotated because they've taken huge losses? And if they've taken huge, so sometimes rotation can indicate that things aren't going so well for the defenders or for whoever's fighting. In this case, Ukrainians in and around Bakhmut. Now, near Klishchivka, Wagner consolidated north and northwest of the village and are advancing towards Ivaniska, having established control over 4 strong points and 3 firing positions. The capture of Ivaniska will allow operational encirclement of Bakhmut. And Defmon says the AFU repulsed attacks in the area of Bakhmut and Stupochki. I think the Russians are trying to find a way to advance around the high ground northwest of Klishchivka, absolutely. Most likely held by the Ukrainians. They tried the northern route yesterday. So this is just to let you know what's going on there. We have Klishchivka here, and this is the area that the Ukrainians are trying to find a way through to Ivanivska, whilst also trying to move up the canal towards Stupochki, just over here, which is south of Chasiv Yar. This is Chasiv Yar, is the settlement where they have their reserves, and they use this to supply Bakhmut. It's obviously a lot safer and out of range of most artillery. So that's the situation there. The Syriac maps does indicate that the Russians made some gains just now effectively to the west rather than the southwest of Klishchivka. For the Russian army and DPR, because they never say Wagner, forces continue advancing towards the H-32 highway and took control over new positions around the water channel and are approaching Stobochki and Ivanivska towns. So this is that area there that they now claim that they're in control. These guys, Syriac, also claim that the Russians hold these entrenchments just to the west of Klishchivka, where like no other mappers do. So it will be interesting to see exactly what's going on there. So if you look at my map here, I've got the sort of Russian claims and the Ukrainian claims, but the Russian claims appear to include these extensive entrenchments, or at least part of them. They do stretch back quite a way, and these, remember, are maps from I think 2019. So there'll be a lot more extensive entrenchments built into here now for sure. So anyway, that's what's going on in that area. We'll come out of Bakhmut now and go down to Donetsk, where actually not too much is happening. So let's come down to Avdivka, so past New York. Avdivka here, not a lot to be said. There, ISW says there is geolocated footage now to suggest that the Russians have advanced in the eastern parts of Vodyane. But other than that, there's repelled attacks around Pervomaisky, all the usual culprits around here. As we come down to Marinka, there's a few things to be said about Marinka, but not a lot. In terms of ISW, we have the Russians conducting assaults in the Marinka direction. Russian mill bloggers continue to claim that Russian forces are fighting for the control of the western part of Marinka. So that will be Rebar who say that. They haven't said anything today, interestingly, but they say they're fighting the western part. Syriac Maps gives a little bit more detail and says that the Russian army and DPR forces during the last days, where troops were captured and the rest of the high buildings southwest of the town of Marinka. Um, Captured the rest of high buildings. Marinka is now reduced completely to rubble, which is true. Pretty much. These are the buildings that they claim have just been captured. I've actually had that in under Russian hands for, I don't know, a good week or so. So this is in the Marinka direction. So we come here. They're talking about Russia capturing these buildings. Well, yep, I already had that. So Rebar, on the other hand, is saying there's fighting in the west. That's just not the case. Not many other people really mention either Donetsk or Marinka. Defmon says the Ukrainians repulse attacks around Bakhmutivka, Pervomaisky, and Marinka. Nothing new here. Russian channels continue to claim success in Marinka. That's Rebar. But I have actually reduced the Russian progress there the last few weeks. So, yeah, not too much to report. And then really be going on to the Zaporizhia area, where there's a few sort of claims concerning, as we sort of miss out Vuhledar, we miss out Velika Novoselivka. There is a bit of fighting around Vremivka there, but the main sort of fighting is around Orikhiv, which is all the way down here. Now, I've been trying to work out how I do my mapping here, because you have all sorts of different claims from all sorts of different people. I think that's basically what the Ukrainians are claiming. That's what the Russians are claiming. I think the Russians have taken Lobkovia, as I've said before, and Novopokrovka, just over there. And there's lots of claims about Kamyanska, which is this town right on the edge of the water here. Rebar says of Kamyanska that in the Zaporizhia sector, the Russian armed forces dislodged Ukrainian formations from the village of Kamyanska. They call it a village a city and a town a village. Oh, it's so confusing. But haven't occupied the village due to enemy artillery. The village is in no man's land. Okay, so this is this area here where perhaps the Russians control the southern area of it and the Ukrainians control the northern area. It's certainly not a village, that is for sure. Goodness me. But other than that, there's just all these different claims about what is going on in this Zaporizhia area. Defmon takes a mickey out of Rebar, who made these big claims about these 4 towns being taken by the Russians. In the Zaporizhia region, a lot of Russian claims here. Rebar has reduced their claims of progress on their map to the, quote, pre-offensive position around Orikhiv and Malotokmachka. Russian sources have also made claims capturing Kamyanska, which is just over there, like I was telling you about. Really, I don't think there's a huge amount of movement yesterday. Artillery is active very much around there. Rebar, I think, really oversold the progress that Russians made in this area a couple of days ago, and are probably regretting it now. The lines, who knows? This probably represents a grey zone, to be honest, between the Russian and Ukrainian lines there. I keep an eye on that today and see if there's any movement worthy of note. Last thing to say really is concerning Kherson and this area just in the river estuary, in this kind of delta region. There is this island of Potemkin Island. Not much is happening besides artillery duels. There's no reports of the area. Kherson region is shelled each day, inflicting damage on residential areas. Footage appeared of the Russian flag in the south of Potemkin Island, while Ukraine hoisted their flag north. Russian controls the southern part. So here we have Potemkin Island there. We've got a flag being raised at that point, and the northern area is Ukrainian, southern area is Russian controlled. In fact, Syriac Maps has that geolocation, if it is something of interest to you. So this is the footage that people are talking about, just a Russian flag, and this gives you a sense of what Potemkin Island is in the estuary, and half of it, or some of it, controlled by the Russians, some of it controlled by the Ukrainians. So there you go. That is that area. Keep an eye on that, and that's where a boat was destroyed. A Russian boat was destroyed over the last 24 hours. Anyway, thank you for bearing with me. That was the frontline update for the 24th. Not too much information about Crimea. There are HIMARS hits. The substation was hit behind the lines in the Ukrainian, in the Russian occupied territories. Don't know whether that's good use of HIMARS substations. I'd be hitting troop accumulations, but maybe it's all about intelligence, and sometimes you just don't have enough intelligence about where certain things are. So you hit something you do know where it is. Anyway, let me know your thoughts in the threads below. Please like, subscribe, and share. Thank you for your support, and I will catch up with you later in a Ukraine War Update extra video. Also, as many of you know, I did a live stream with Orest Zub, a Ukrainian. I interviewed him. That's on my Atypical Philosopher channel. It's linked below. But I am speaking to him on his channel today. I don't know if it's live. It's at 1 o'clock today. It might be live on his channel, but it might be a pre-record. I'm waiting to hear back from him. So we're going to be having a chat about the Ukraine war as well, as he kind of interviews me. That might be of interest to you. Please check out his channel anyway and subscribe to it. It's some fantastic content on there. So thank you.